I think it's about time we finished off the PC engine. The few bits and pieces that I was waiting on from AliExpress, those have arrived. That was namely an RGB output, plugs into the back of the console, and a turbo Everdrive. This will just make things a bit easier for playing games. Speaking of playing games though, the other thing we were missing was a Joypad. So I've got one of those complete in box. But before we worry about any of that, let's decide what we're gonna do with this case. I had toyed with the crazy idea of trying to retain the dirt on this, almost as if a sort of patina. But considering that the majority of what you're looking at here is actually pigeon poop, well, I don't think that really qualifies as patina, poop-tina, if you would. So let's give the case a clean. But while the case is having its bath, how about we plug this in and make sure it still works? We'll just test it using the one original Hue card that I have, just this golf game. Same one we were using last time. And does it still work? Yeah, it certainly appears to. All sounds right. Let's plug in the Joypad. I picked this up from eBay recently. One boxed NEC PC Engine Turbo Pod. And there it is. Pretty clean. And I would hope when we do finally get the case cleaned up, it will at least somewhat match the plastic on this. Now, you know me, I couldn't possibly buy something just simple. Rather, this thing is missing a couple of screws. Missing 3 screws to be exact. That screw there feels as if it's stripped. In fact, doesn't feel as if it's stripped, it is stripped. So I just hope this works. It was sold as working. Let's plug it in. Let's throw the power and see what it does. Push run button. The run button isn't running. None of the buttons are doing very much. Have I bought a lemon? Or is it going to be that? Well, I think I found the problem. And I think it's this, the 8-pin mini DIN. If you look up in there, and I'm not sure how well it will come across on camera, but there's meant to be 8 pins in there, and there's only 5. 3 of them have snapped off. How would that ever have happened? But regardless, you need all 8. All 8 are carrying signals, and with 3 missing, this ain't gonna work. So I think all we can do is cut that off, and I'll order up a new 8-pin mini DIN, which we'll have to make off onto the cable. Well, out of its bath, and it does look pretty good, although the case does seem to have yellowed. So since the sun's out for a change, let's mix up some retro bright solution. And we'll drop this in here. I'm going to leave it for a day and hopefully that brings it back. Slight change of plans. I did go looking for an 8-pin mini DIN, but stumbled across this cable, and I certainly think it'll be easier to replace the whole thing rather than cut up the old cable and try to make that off onto a new one of those. There isn't a lot of room to work inside one of them. So I've buzzed all this out to figure out which pin each of those relates to. It is actually in order. Pins 1 to 8 here are made off to pins 1 to 8 there. The colours here though, well, they don't correspond to this cable, so I buzzed this out as well. I have this rather handy little diagram, and so using that we will just remove that. I'm going to remove that connector block and we'll just make the new cable off onto there. Now the keen-eyed here will point out that that is a 9-pin connector. It's only an 8-pin mini DIN though. What's the 9th? Well, on the original cable it ran to the shielding there. We don't have 9 cores within the new cable. That shield is unconnected, but pins 8 and 9, they are joined together. Pin 8 is just the ground, so I think we'll be okay without it. Let's put it back together and try it again. Right, Joypad goes in there. We'll just try the golf game again. Just because this is the only original Hue card, we can try that Everdrive in a minute. And let's throw the switch. So it wanted us to press run, didn't it? Hey, seems to be working. Now, how do I load something in this game? My Japanese is not quite up to scratch. Can I fumble my way through this? Hole number 1, 506 meter par 5. Quite the difficult opening hole. And so how do we play this game? One wood, yeah, that'll do. We'll just hit this ball right in the middle. I assume this is our par. Let's set that to the maximum and let's see if we can hit it. That looks good. Yeah. Not bad for our first attempt. Can we do that again? We'll try a 3-wood this time. Let's give it another rip. Ah, not so good. Okay, golf games are not the most exciting thing, are they? Let's see if we can load something else on the Everdrive. And what will we do? Let's have a look in the USA folder. And we'll just go with the first one there, will we? Aero blasters. Let's see what this is about. Hey, that doesn't look right. It looks like we've got corruption. Yeah, that definitely doesn't look right. So do we have further fault on the PC engine? Yeah, it's completely screwed itself up there. Let's try something else. Maybe it's just a bad ROM. How about a bit of Space Harrier? Yeah, that definitely doesn't look right. Is there something else wrong with this? Or could it be a bad Everdrive? If I could find this game on here, to try to load this game from the Everdrive, would that maybe be a test? And yeah, I looked that up. This game is actually this one here, Ganber Golf Boys. So let's load it here from the Everdrive and see what it does. Yeah, that's definitely not right. It wasn't doing that when using the real Hue card. Have I bought a dodgy Everdrive? That would be kind of annoying. I wonder if maybe it's just a bad connection. Let's go over this with a bit of IPA. Not that I would expect this to be dirty, because I mean this is brand new. Let me hold that like that. see if it makes any difference. And we'll just try our golf game again. Well, not just as bad this time. Still showing corruption. Different corruption, mind. I think this might just be a bad connection. Those contacts there are quite far into the card, aren't they? Certainly further into it than they are on the Hue card. I'm going to file a bit off the front of that to see if this will go further into the slot and possibly make better connection. Right, I have taken quite a bit off that. You can see now that it is more or less even with the contacts on this. In fact, if anything, the front of those contacts is now sitting slightly forward of what is on that. So hopefully this will make as good a connection as we can do. I've also given that a bit of a clean in there. There was a little bit of crud came out of it, but it couldn't have been that much of a problem because this Hue card worked. Let's try this though. We'll just try the golf game again. Yeah, has that solved it? No, so close. The background all looked fine there. And then the title comes up with corruption. Yeah, definitely not solved. I still think this might be a connectivity thing. Because if it was a fault with the PC Engine, then why does this work? Yeah, still screwed up. Let me get another SD card and try that, just to rule that out. Well, it's not the SD card, because I tried another one, which I know is good, and exactly the same problems. To be sure to rule out the PC Engine, I stuck the original golf game back in and played that for about 20 minutes. It's fine. There is no graphical corruption whatsoever. So I don't think it's this. It's not the SD card. It has to be the Turbo Everdrive itself. That's a bit of a shame, and I'm not sure if we'd be able to fix that. So we need to have a think about that. Let's just put it to the side for now, because one thing that we can do, this whole setup here is a bit janky, so let's get the PC Engine back into its case. Now, one thing that I was considering was to take the 7805 here and replace it with one of those new Traco voltage regulators. Those would not require the heatsink. I have been running this thing without a heatsink, which doesn't do it any favours, to be honest. But I am going to retain the 7805. I managed to get the old one off the heatsink, off the old heatsink, and so we can refit that in there. I do need to get a screw to go down through it though. And I know I was giving off about this last time, but let's just put a screw down through it. That screw will fit through the hole in the regulator and the hole in the board. It's just ever so slightly too big for the aluminium heatsink, so it is cutting its own threads into that. And it is pretty tight there, but I'll just drop a bit of solder onto that point there just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Now granted, that will be a complete pain in the backside to get off again, but hopefully it won't be me taking it off. While we're down here, the other thing I want to do is just remove my bodged on AV cable. In fact, that just snapped off as I touched it. And that's that gone. So let's put it back in the case. The case that turned out fantastic. You wouldn't think that is the same thing. Sure you wouldn't. That looks amazing. Certainly a million times better than it did at the start of this video. There still is some evidence of the rusting inside, but I'm not too fussed about that. You'll never see it. It does look beautifully clean though from the outside. So reassembly time. This goes in here. And I think it was these screws in it. Just turning the screws backwards first of all until they find their thread. Then just nipping them up. We don't want to swing on it. We don't want to crack the plastic. The PC engine itself sits in there like that. Need to put the switch on, which goes something like that. Now we can just close this up. You can see a bit of that damage to the top PCB through there, so I'll need to do something about that. But let's just put the screws back in it for now anyway, so that we can test it. Just nipping them up for now. Doesn't it look fantastic? Now we obviously can't power it up using the bench power supply anymore. Rather, I'm going to use a Everdrive 1 power supply. This jack on the side is center negative, which is the same as the Everdrive 1. Don't try and use a Everdrive 2 power supply though, because that is center positive. I'll plug in the Joypad. I'll go for our original Hue card. To get a video signal out of it now, I bought this thing. It goes into the expansion port at the back. I'll maybe try and print a little housing for this, but it'll be fine like that in the meantime. It does provide RGB output, stereo audio and composite video. We'll just hook up the composite video for now. Or there's an option on this for a Everdrive 2 AV cable. Funny they went with Everdrive 2 AV cable, because you definitely can't use a Everdrive 2 power supply. That might be a little confusing for someone. But anyway, let's see if it still works. Yep, and the game's fine. No corruption, no problems. At least I've got one game to play on the PC engine. It's just a shame that there's something going on with this, because I was really looking forward to playing some of these games. Splatterhouse, that's meant to be fantastic on the PC engine. That actually looks okay. Yeah, there's no corruption at all. What? Let me just try our golf game again. And now this is fine as well. What is going on? Has this magically fixed itself? Okay, I've taken this back out of the case because I need to know why this just magically started working. The only difference really is that power supply. And one theory, talking to Gadget UK this morning, one theory is that perhaps my cheapo bench power supply, perhaps it's putting a lot of ripple into the PC engine and upsetting it. Or I do have the bench power supply set to 9 volts, but I have it limited to half an amp. And while this thing generally isn't pulling more than about 300 milliamp, with me limiting it to 500 milliamp, are there occasions where the Everdrive is causing the machine to draw more than that, causing a volt drop and causing a problem? Let's just test it again like this. And we'll just stick to our golf game. And yeah, that all looks fine. So is it a problem with the power supply that I was using? Let's hook up the bench PSU again. And let's see what happens. You can see actually when we're running it from the bench PSU, you can definitely see noise in the picture. But will we now see the corruption again? No. Yeah, all of that looks fine. Now there is that sort of waviness in the picture like there was earlier. And I wonder, is that just noise coming out of my bench power supply? I do have the 9 volt coming in here to to the same place it was earlier. It's just connected to that diode. But I'm wondering, are we bypassing anything here before that diode that would be filtering out any of that noise? The game does seem to be running okay though. There's no sign of corruption. Yeah, all of that looks fine. I would like to try and recreate the scenario where we have the corruption because I want to know what was causing it. I suppose we had this thing, we had this thing sort of stretched out, didn't we? And this was sort of hanging, something like that. Just put it on its side. Let's try it like that. The corruption's back. I can see it in the background there. Yeah. That brings me back to the thinking that this is a loose connection somewhere. I wonder, do we have a dry solder joint on the cartridge connector? Or possibly on the ribbon? Although if that was the case, why doesn't it happen with the original cart? With that one? This is so weird. If I go back to the other power supply, what does it do now? Well, our video signal is cleaned up, but we still have the corruption. So it's not a power supply issue. It's something to do with the PC engine. And yeah, I think it is just a bad connection somewhere. If I wiggle that there, I mean, I don't see anything moving. I don't see any sign of any cracked solder joints. But there obviously is something weird going on here. So a quick reflow will hopefully resolve any potential issue. And then the other thing that I want to do, just while I have the soldering iron out, see this grey wire running here? It's connecting a ground plane here to one here. And that is a factory bodge wire. But as I understand anyway, there should be a couple more. There should be one from that point to there, from that point to there, and then from that point back to here. You see, this version of the PC engine, I think that's the model number there, and it ends in a -0, so would that confirm that this is an early model of the PC engine? This one didn't have a shield in the case. The later models do have shielding inside the case, and it's that shielding which links up all those points. This one doesn't have it and has these wires instead. So while the soldering iron's out, I just want to reinstate the other ones. I don't have any more grey wire, but I do have plenty of black. So we'll just take this off and remake the 1, 2, 3, 4 wires using this stuff. Right, that's those 4 wires on. That's the ground planes all connected as they would have been from the factory, or at least as I understand anyway. If anyone knows any different, please let me know. It should be noted that if you do remove all of them, the grounds are all connected. This, I suppose, is just belts and braces. But more to the point of the soldering exercise, if we balance this up here again, does it still have corruption? Just go back to our usual golf game and yep, it still has problems. You can see it in the grass, you can see it in the logo. I have no idea what's going on here. If I pull that out and put this in, same game, just the original hue card of it. Well, as you can see, it's now fine. Back to the Everdrive. And back to corruption. Oh, absolute head scratcher. I set that down flat. Put that like that, sort of as it is inside the case. I'll just hold it in that position. And it's working fine. If anyone can tell me why this is doing this, other than it maybe being ghosts, it is October after all, yeah, please let me know, because I have no idea. Just put it all back in the case. The other thing then that I said I would touch on just from the last video, remember there was a modification on the bottom of this. There were 3 cut traces, there, and there. And there were 2 wires. I think one was from that position, another from over here somewhere. And those were run up to this edge connector. Now the 2 cut traces up here, there was one of them there, which was just a ground. So that was cut, isolating that pin. One of those wires was coming up to here and routing that signal out through that pin, you know, the former ground pin. The other one, I think, was that one below it, or maybe the one beside it. But it was running from that trace there, which is cut, and that was carrying the IRQ2 signal. So one thing this mod would definitely do is stop you being able to use the likes of the CD-ROM expansion, because that expansion requires the IRQ2 signal. The trace that was cut down here, it was a 24 megahertz clock, and if you remember, we couldn't get a stable video signal out of this console, this NTSC console. We couldn't get a stable image out of it until I reinstated that. So the assumption was that the mod here was part of some expansion to maybe give you a PAL video signal. This was used in the UK after all. We use a PAL video signal. And in fact, Ginger Hippy Gaming, who found these PC engines in his pigeon poop warehouse, well, alongside them, he found these things. PAL 5060 TV booster. And Sai was kind enough to open one of them up for us, provide this picture of the internals. You can see there it is picking up various signals from the edge connector. It's picking up the left and right audio. It's definitely picking up the video signal, and there's a few other bits and pieces there. But if we look at what's on the board in this expansion, well, there are 3 ICs, an RF modulator, and it looks like that thing needed its own power supply, which is a bit odd. Why wouldn't you just power it off the PC engine? But regardless of that, of the 3 chips, the bottom one there in the image, that is a PAL video encoder. And so that would be the giveaway. Whatever mod was carried out to this was to enable that PAL 5060 TV booster, as it's called. Although I don't think it's really boosting anything, rather I think it's just taking the NTSC video signal and converting it to PAL. Just one last thing actually before we do put the lid back on for the final time. This bit of corrosion here where we can see the copper, I've been scraping at that just with my fingernail, just to remove any of the remaining loose solder mask. I think that's all of it now. And so just to tidy that up, I'm going to go over it with a bit of green nail polish. This will just stop you seeing any of that copper through the slot in the case. I think that'll do. I'll let that dry just before we do finally reassemble it. I have put that on quite thick and quite deep as well, but that's just to make sure that you can't see anything but that darker green when you're looking through there. Well, I'm pretty pleased with how the PC engine has turned out. It's came an awful long way from what it was like when I first got it. It is a very compact little machine, isn't it? And there is a nice weight to it. It almost gives it like a nice feeling quality, like a nice build quality. Although mine now has a gaping hole in the side of it. What could I possibly put in there? One thought I had actually was this thing, and the fact that it uses a Mega Drive 2 AV cable. Could we somehow hack one of those into there? The Mega Drive 2 AV port is about the same size as that, and that certainly fits in there fine. So could we get an RGB and audio output there? It would save having to have this thing hanging off the back of the console. Plus, it would let me use the other expansions available for this. And since I have it here in my hand, the Joypad, well, yes, that works okay. Eventually works okay. Although the case is still falling apart. In fact, one screw has just fell out of it. It really only is the one screw at this point here holding it together. The others are completely stripped. It's not though that the stems inside there are cracked or anything. They're just stripped. So how would I go about repairing that? Would anyone have any ideas of something I could try to reform those little stems? Or the insides of them anyway. Maybe some glue and baking soda and then carefully drill it out again. I'm not sure. But I'll leave that for another time. For now though, I'm just happy to have a working PC engine. Or well, it works as long as it's together like that. If we take it apart and try it with the turbo Everdrive, it doesn't work at all. Just keeps throwing that corruption. I have no idea what that's all about. Speaking to Gadget UK about it again, he remains convinced that there's something floating, maybe a floating ground or a loose connection somewhere else. Possibly. Might even be damage in one of the ICs that only works when it's sitting in a certain orientation with the pressure of everything sitting on top of it. But who's to know, really? I suppose if that fault does creep up again, I will come back to it, revisit it at that point. But if anyone has any ideas of what was going on there, please let me know. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you've seen, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already? Still plenty more yet to come here on CRG, and I'll see you next time.